good evening, depending where on this beautiful planet you are dialing from. Welcome to the Information Day webinar of Open Call for Blueprint Projects. I'm your host, Sami Kazemi, lead built environment from Circular Economy and a member of Circular Buildings Coalition. We are here today with you, with Metabolic team, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, World Green Building Council, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and ARO, all members of Circular Buildings Coalition. And this coalition has been generously supported by the Loudest Foundation. Hopefully you are very familiar with the Circular Buildings Coalition and our activities. And today we are here to give you more information about the open call that we have recently launched at a World Circular Economy Forum earlier this month, in light of the report on the current state of play about the circularity in the built environment sector in the European countries. Next slide, please. Before we start, I would like to let everybody know that this session will be recorded. And if you have any questions, please insert them in the question box, and we will come back into your questions in answering your questions. Next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of brief about what you can expect from the session of today, we will have I will guide you through the agenda points, and it will be followed by the definition and more explanation on the blueprint projects. We have speakers on finance, Yvonne Fong from Metabolic, on the markets, Carolina Montano Owen from World Green Building Council, on the ownership, Max Russell from ARO. This is going to be followed by explanation on the process of the application and the evaluation of the open call applications. And then we will have a Q&A session to answer all your questions. In the Q&A session, we have already received some questions in advance that we would like to proceed with answering those questions first, and then we will be happily providing answer and feedback to your questions. So please, throughout the session, do not hesitate to include your questions and insert your questions in the Q&A box. Thank you so much. And from here, I pass on to Yvonne. Thank you, Yvonne.
Okay, thank you very much, Sami. Max and Carolina will go into a bit of detail on what the types of blueprint projects we are looking to fund for this round of the Circular Buildings Coalition. Just to recap from our previous presentation, a blueprint project is an existing solution that is developed or modified for the benefits of the public. So that's one. Two, which can bridge some critical gap in the shift to a circular built environment. And three, which can be replicated and expanded upon by others. So it is not necessarily a research project, but it's really a template for an initiative which can then potentially be implemented in a phase 2 of this process. Okay, so why would you join? So one is to maximize the systemic impact of your initiative towards a circular built environment, because you want to, contribute to the acceleration of the transition. The second one is simply to secure some grant funding, really to cover costs towards this activity. Three is it's an opportunity to work with some of the organizations within the Circular Buildings Coalition. So we will provide some support during the first phase of the process. So that might be interesting for you. And we will, of course, help to gain some awareness of your solution in our respective communication channels. Next slide. Okay, so in the World Circular Economy Forum, we presented our report, Systemic Challenges Towards a Circular Economy in the Built Environment, where we analyzed 3 systemic challenges: finance, materials and supply chains / markets, and ownership / business models. And we identified 10 challenge areas that we think are important to address to accelerate transition. 4 in finance, 3 in material and supply chains, and 3 in ownership. Of course, there are much more challenges, but these are the ones that we focus on for this round. And they sort of, these 10 challenge areas, to really create sort of, they determine what types of projects we will fund. So for the finance challenge, we are really looking for any initiative that can help something that we call capturing circular value. So of course, the value of a circular building is often higher than a normal building, but it's not easy to capture this value because it's not accounted for, or there's no actual processes to capture this value. So there's four related challenges here. First one is capturing unrealized salvage value. So of course, the salvage value, a circular building has some kind of salvage value, which consists of the materials that can come out of it. How can you bring that value somehow up front and make sure that it's considered while investing in a circular building? Second would be looking at different accounting practices to have a different view on the depreciation of a building. In many sort of linear buildings, depreciation is done in sort of huge chunks of a building, but you could of course say that, okay, perhaps it should be done by the time span of a building layer, for example, structure different from the facade. Third one would be, okay, how can we account for some of the positive externalities presented by circular buildings? So is there a way to account for those? That could be an initiative. And then the fourth one is there a way to increase the transparency of a circular building? Because of course, there's much more granular information that you would need of a circular building in order to address all these points above here. That's it from the finance part. Next slide. I think Carolina.
Thank you, Ivan. Nice to see you all. From the market's perspective, we found 3 main challenges. The first one is related to secondary materials. And I think you might have heard that, for instance, the second delegated act of the EU taxonomy was approved yesterday, and it has strict targets on the use of raw materials. This initiative, together with other national regulations that are starting to emerge, are setting the scene for quantitative targets in terms of primary and secondary materials that should be used in construction projects. Therefore, we want to fund solutions that promote the appropriate use of secondary materials. The second big challenge we identified was regarding the connection between supply and demand of secondary materials at scale. We have seen that there are many obstacles regarding storage, adequate information and certification of materials, quantities available and required, and between others. So we invite projects and ideas that will facilitate the exchange of reused and recycled products. And last but not least, we want to increase collaboration between the private and the public sector. Therefore, we are inviting frameworks or guidelines that will mainstream the inclusion of circularity economy principles in the built environment. So with that, I will hand over to Max. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolina. Yes, so another one of the core areas that we're exploring within the Blueprint projects is related to ownership. Now, ownership is kind of inherently and intrinsically linked to who can do business and who can influence the use of particular materials and assets through the built environment. And it's really inherently linked to the ways in which we do business and the business models in which we employ. So conventional, kind of more linear, kind of point of sale ownership models, really limit or aren't as conducive to circularity. Yet there are alternatives, and what we showed in the report, there are some really promising alternatives to more kind of different ownership models and business models that are more conducive to circularity. So throughout, and these Blueprint projects are related to some of the challenges that we identified, and the first of which is really the evidence base and the kind of showcase of alternative ownership or business models, for example, product as a service models that are being applied practically speaking. So what we really are hoping for is some blueprint projects that can really demonstrate that value of a given alternative business or ownership models. So where is it being applied? It could be a pilot project that's practically applied one of these alternative models into a given typology, geography, or even kind of providing a bit of a business model template that can highlight scalability. There are other kind of a variety of other challenges in kind of the background conditions that can enable these alternative business models. So for example, they cover different financial models, the legal structures in which we operate, as well as policy and regulation and procurement as well. So this second section of the blueprint projects is really hoping for projects that can help to enable or kind of support the enabling conditions. And what we mean by that is to address some of those underlying challenges that are outlined further in the report as well. So for example, setting out standardized legal templates or developing financial models that can be scaled across different uses. And this final section, encouraging new forms of collaboration, kind of similar to a lot of elements of the circular economy. It really calls for a new way of how we interact across the supply chain. So ideas or blueprint projects within this section can relate to, for example, matchmaking programs, platforms, or facilities that can help match demand with perhaps supply and different suppliers of, for example, product as a service models, or perhaps new examples of governance models that can encourage this alternative forms of collaboration and change as well. So really giving a blueprint to some of those new forms of collaboration. And with that, I'll hand over as well.
Thank you. My name is Eva. I'll be speaking a little bit about the phases of the open call and the application and evaluation process itself. Next slide, please. So in this open call, we have two phases overall. The first phase is really focused on developing your concept, a blueprint project in a white paper. This first phase will run about 4 months. And for this first phase, you'll be selecting 8 most promising solutions that will be each granted €20,000 to develop this concept further. With the second phase then running 6 months, so a bit longer than the first one. And the second phase will be focused on 4 most promising solutions selected from the initial 8. And the second phase will be focused on really piloting, disseminating the concept in the market. Next slide, please. So this first phase, as I mentioned, is really focused on this initial development phase, where selected solution providers will be conducting a feasibility study and producing a plan for how to overcome existing barriers, how to create demand for their solutions, and how to actually plan for diffusing their solutions in the market. And there are a few practical outputs that we will require the participants to produce as part of the process. First one, really focusing on this feasibility study. So researching the feasibility of your solution across different dimensions, be it economic, social, political, legal, or technical feasibility. Capturing learnings along the way. Very importantly, also developing this very clear diffusion plan for your solution, which can then be sort of used as a guidance or input for phase 2, when you will be actually diffusing the solutions. Another point of the output is really validated interest, that there is interest for the solution from clients and potential pilot partners. And the sort of final output, which will capture all of the above, is a white paper, which you will produce, really detailing all this information with the intention to have this as an asset that can be publicly shared on the CBC website. In the first phase, you will be also receiving support from the CBC Coalition, and there are a few different elements to that. First of all, each solution provider will be working directly with one of the partners, which will be sort of matched based on what the solution is focused on. And this partner will be providing biweekly guidance, be it around reviewing core materials, providing some technical support, or sharing the huge network that we collectively have. And you'll be also receiving some initial guidance about how to actually conduct a feasibility study and what a good white paper would look like. We can move to the next phase, which is then all focused on this implementation. So really piloting, disseminating, where these 4 selected participants will work towards making these pilots happen. The input, as I mentioned earlier, is the white paper that will be produced in phase 1. And then the output, the sort of outcomes of phase 2, as we envision, is having selected projects really diffuse their solutions to target stakeholders, measure initial results from these pilots, capture learnings, report on progress on an ongoing basis, so they can be also checked by the CBC partners, and then develop plans for how to take the solution further post your involvement with the CBC coalition. Once again, you will receive different types of support for phase 2. This will be collectively getting advice and recommendations for CBC partners in writing, also receiving further implementation guidance, as well as access to network, which will be very crucial, of course, in this phase, which will be all about practically working with different stakeholders and diffusing the solution. And once again, here, the selected blueprint projects will receive 75K in grant funding, which should be really used to support the execution of the diffusion plan as defined in phase 1. We can go to the next one. Here, I just wanted to briefly touch on the application process itself and how the selection will work. Almost any organization that is legally registered in Europe is eligible to apply. And one can apply by quite simply filling out a type form, which you can access via this link or on our website, which will be asking some general information about yourself, the blueprint project itself, everything from sort of the history, core objectives, as well as how the funding that you would receive would be used actually to support some of these impact objectives. All in all, we have about 20 questions and we envision about 3 pages in writing as the application itself. So it actually is fairly concise with the intention for you not to spend too much time filling out the application, but really trying to be to the point, looking at the questions at hand. Your applications will be then reviewed by the selection committee, which will be consisted of representatives from all of the different CBC partners, as you can see here, and as Sami mentioned earlier. And we will have 2 separate selection criteria. First one being the ones that we will apply to select the 8 solutions for phase 1. These are public value, transition alignment, and feasibility. These 3 initial criteria are the ones which have the most weight. So we will be allocating up to 5 points for these 3. And then the other ones are organization, solution fit, uniqueness of the solution, and challenge impact. And these will be up to 3 points each. When it comes to submitting your application to get to phase 2, we will be again using the first 3 criteria that I already mentioned on the left-hand side, plus there will be additional 4 criteria that will be important for this phase, which is the quality of the white paper that you produce in the first phase, practical feasibility of the solution, the diffusion potential, so really to what extent there is the potential to get it to the market, the interest from stakeholders, and lastly, strength of the consortia, the planned partnerships. If you would like to know more information about each of these criteria, we do have a rubric. We have more information which can be found on the website and also on some of the links that we will be sharing a bit later. Next slide, please. Here you can see just a bit of a timeline visually to better imagine what the process looks like. You can see that we launched the open call on the 1st of June, and it will be open until the 20th of July. With the selection committee then working until the end of August to select the most promising solutions, and the first phase starting at the end of August, running until the end of the year. Before the end of the year, then you will be asked to submit your application to enter phase 2. And then there's about 3 weeks early next year once you will, before you will know that you were or were not selected to the second phase. And here you can see, thank you, some core dates around that as well. I've already mentioned some of these, but you can see that 19th of January, shall you be selected for the second phase, you'll be notified. And then the second phase will start in the 1st of February 2024 and will run until 30th of July 2024. Once again, these dates can be all found on the website. And if you click on the next slide, this is a link which I think is a really good resource for all of the people here considering to apply. It's a guideline for applicants where you can find all the information I just talked about in a bit more detail. So I suggest you having a look. And now we are going to be going to the Q&A. So Ivan, it's all yours.
Great questions are actually coming up. Thanks for posting your questions. Please continue and then we come back to your questions. Yes, Ivan, over to you.
Thanks. We answered a few questions in the chat. There was there's a few confusions on between 70K and 75K. That's a little bit awkward. So we'll get back on that one very quickly. And that's for the second round. Then there's a few questions that were shared in advance for track 3 ownership. Should we do more in-depth research into the details or a slightly less comprehensive approach? And then secondly, should we focus on one project or more, focus on one area development or explore the European landscape? So these two questions. Okay, so for me, these two questions, they sort of suggest that a blueprint project perhaps is that the project that the person that this question is considering looks a little bit like a research project. We're not necessarily looking for a research project. We're really looking for an idea for an initiative, and that initiative, so that an initiative which can then be implemented in the second phase. So from that perspective, it would definitely benefit the initiative to be sort of more in-depth and less sort of wide, and would probably favor your application if it's focusing on one project, but a project that can act as a template for implementation in other geographies, right? So here it's like, okay, if is it one area or multiple area? No, it's a project that should be developed for one place, but then could be replicated so that it's not too specific. Maybe the criterion encourages new forms of collaboration. Max, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this relates to I think the third challenge in the ownership section. So indeed, it can be quite wide and open to interpretation to an extent. The emphasis behind this one is to really support, new forms of collaboration across the supply chain that can really enable the conditions for these alternative business models or ownership models. So as I mentioned kind of during the presentation, taking an example of products as a service systems, one idea could be like a matchmaking platform or a network that can link up demand and potential suppliers as well, to really help the collaboration and the kind of the matching of the market for that particular ownership model. There could be alternatives and a variety of different ways of addressing that challenge, but the emphasis really is trying to create the conducive environment to support these alternative ownership models and business models that are through new forms of collaboration, which is required. So giving an example, but perhaps leaving it a little bit still open, because we want to encourage kind of creativity and we don't want to be too prescriptive, let's say, but hopefully that gives a little bit more clarity as to what we're looking at.
Excellent. Yes, so we are now going to ask some of the questions that is already on the chat, on the Q&A box. We're going to read it out to our speakers, and the speakers feel free to answer any of these questions. So there's questions about the clarification. Maybe Yvonne, maybe you can explain a little bit and elaborate a little bit about that. The fact that we are funding initiatives and a bit of clarification on the companies, and if we need consortium, is there any minimum company required? So if you can elaborate a little bit on that to give some clarity, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so one question is, what if a project has already started? Your approach seems to be only for new ideas that have not been implemented yet. Yeah, so it is indeed possible that you are, let's say you have developed, I can't think of an example for a project, but I think it can indeed sort of attach to an existing project, but add some kind of new dimension. And that new dimension should be something that sort of help diffuse or replicate the project in other places, right? So if you have a project, then the question from us to you is, let's say, okay, how would can this project be a template for similar projects in other places? You know, how would you, change or modify this project sort of to the public good? And then the Blueprint project is sort of the way to do that. So we can type that out. So we have that recorded as well. I hope that answers the question of Ivan, great name, and Emma. Question of anonymous attendee, we're based in Switzerland. Are you allocating funds to Swiss organizations? Yes, so that is in the conditions. So Switzerland is included there. Diffusion to
Yvonne, can you maybe you can elaborate on the fact that how many companies, is there any minimum requirement for the company, and the fact that we are basically funding the initiative and not companies or consortiums? So, yeah, so if you can just clarify that.
So we're not funding companies per se, but we're really funding an initiative. I don't know if you want to elaborate, Sammy.
Yes, so that's it. So it is very clear. We don't have any requirement for any number of consortium or partners in the initiative, as long as you are registered. You are a registered company and more than one person, you can apply for the fund, and that's it. So our focus, the jury, the criteria is mainly focused on your initiative and not the company and the consortium. So no worries about that. There's a question regarding about cross challenges. So if a project is tackling one or two or maybe more of the challenges, can they still apply? Of course you can apply, and please apply through the challenge that is more dominated. So if, for instance, ownership is the main one, but you're through the ownership solution that you are working on, you are tackling some financial barriers as well, that is absolutely accepted. But please apply with the theme or the challenge that is more dominated in your project. Do you have anything to add to that, Yvonne?
No.
Okay, great. Maybe we can just recapture on the eligible countries and which countries are eligible.
Okay, so it's EU plus Switzerland plus Norway plus UK. That's it. And the project should actually also take place in one of these countries. So even if you're registered in the EU, but your project would be, let's say, in Tanzania, this would not be eligible for, let's say, this version of the open call. Diffusion to new project places mean actual developments, right? Okay, so we're looking for a pilot implementation for our phase 2. We appreciate this could take longer than 7 months or be delayed, and we can be reasonably flexible within good reason for the second phase. For the first phase, the deadlines are set in stone, I would say. What do you mean by white paper? We have some description of what exactly should be included in that white paper for the first phase. But maybe, Eva, do you have something that you want to give back here?
Yeah, I can speak to that. At this point, we envision the white paper being about 20 pages long PDF, which might be specified a bit further, excluding appendices. And here we really want to have some of those aspects I earlier talked about included, starting with the what and why of the initiative, some of the core impact objectives that you're trying to drive with the initiatives, and then looking at two separate things. One is the feasibility. So part of the white paper will be the feasibility study, incorporating the different aspects of feasibility. And then secondly, the fusion plan. So really specifying the different steps that you intend to take in phase 2 to get to disseminating the solutions actually on the market. So it's really about writing out everything that you do in those 4 months of the first phase, which can set you up for success for phase 2. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole idea here is to have this as an open source asset that can be shared with others publicly. And part of the reason for this will be also, or part of the support that you will be receiving is also feedback on the white paper itself from the CBC Concordia partners to make sure that it's as sort of as high quality as possible. I hope this clarifies a little bit.
Yes, Eva, maybe another question to you. Can local authorities participate?
Yes.
Of course, and we would like to have all kinds of initiatives from public, private, and even collaboration between public and private is very much appreciated.
I missed the early part of the webinar. Yes, so it will be shared afterwards, including the slides. How many people are attending this video call? So we had about 100 registrations for this call. Is there any questions that we are missing here? Is there any geographical limitation? Yes, EU, Norway, Switzerland, UK.
I'm not sure if we answered this question, but maybe it's good to elaborate again, Yvonne, on this question, diffusion to new projects and places, and the fact that maybe 7 months is not enough for the projects to, from the moment of the white paper to scaling, maybe this is not enough. So obviously we are not looking for the projects as an idea. These projects that we are seeking, they should be already on the ground. You need to have an equivalent of at least a TRL3. However, we are not using TRL ratings for our assessments. Yes, so that's why we consider that these projects can already be, they are already applied, so they can, this 7 months is already enough for from our perspective.
Okay, I see here. Yeah, so on the TRL question, we'll get back to you. This is something we didn't map our criteria to TRLs. So I think it's better to have, let's say, some examination and then come back to you on that specific question. Can projects be aligned to adapting existing buildings, or is this entirely focused around new builds? Actually, very good question. Did we address this in our criteria? We will get back to you on this question. Thank you, Martin. We will get back to you on this one. I think. Okay, what phase are you referring to when projects on the ground, design phase, implementation? Yeah, so we were looking for a pilot implementation in the phase 2 of the project. And so we would expect that by the end of these 7 months, this pilot implementation is not necessarily already finished because, I mean, we know the building sector, these things take a long time, but that basically that we have, let's say, a good, I mean, that it's in an advanced stage. You have the commitment of the partners to pilot. There, you know, it's basically in a good advanced stage. I appreciate that this is not a super clear explanation, so we'll also maybe get back to you, or let's say clarify what exactly we expect for the second phase in terms of pilot implementation. Do we have a template for the application? Yes, we have. So the application process is done through Typeform. There's a link on our website, circularbuildingscoalition.org, where you can fill in the template. We also, there's a few application questions there, and we can also share after this webinar these application questions separately with the word counts. For you to understand, you know, for you to be able to develop it without going through the Typeform.
There's a question regarding existing buildings or new build. We have not specified. So basically what we are seeking here is solutions to existing problems. So if you have, your initiative is tackling one of the challenges that was mentioned earlier in the webinar, they are more than welcome. So we are not focused on new build or existing. So it all depends on your solution.
Yes, Sammy, we will. Yes, so we will come back with an official writing on this one. What does already existing solution mean? Maybe the solution we have basically already solved, maybe not tried, but needs more research to be scalable and profitable. Yeah, so indeed, existing solution means we're not looking for a solution that is not starting from scratch. Let's say, for example, you have a carbon accounting methodology. We would not be looking for a research project that would develop this methodology, but if this methodology is already there and has already been validated to some extent, then the Blueprint project can be a way to pilot this initiative. So yeah, that's it. So
Ivan, maybe I can also clarify. Yeah, so the way we were looking at it, rather than using the TR language, it really was about existing solutions having a clear minimum viable product. And this doesn't have to mean that the solutions have been already fully implemented before in a relevant context, but it has to be some kind of basic version of the solution that already exists. And that has the potential to address some of the challenges that we identified. So it's really something that's already there tangibly, but needs some steps to be really taken to the market.
Yeah, not-for-profits and academia join for learning. That is one question, and connect to that, can we as individual organizations join as learning partners since we have a geographical limitation for the project? I think the answer is the same as Sammy said before. We are funding initiatives that take place in a certain geographical area. And the lead, let's say the lead applicant should be in that area, and it should be an initiative. So if you can, and so that would mean that you can, of course, as another organization, join as partner for learning. As long as the core of the proposal is that it can lead to an initiative. But it's a good question, and we'll also try to put some writing on that one. I think we still have some time. But if there is no more questions,
there's a new one actually just came in that if we link any projects to any project owner. Unfortunately, we don't have the matching of the interested parties. So feel free to reach out to any companies or any partners that you would like to have for your project. We don't offer it from the coalition side. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, so what do we mean exactly by it should be an initiative? So it should be an initiative, it should be something that can be tested and implemented. So if you, let's say you're creating a, let's say, standardized legal template for the procurement of PaaS services, just as an example, then it should be implemented in the sense that this contract should actually be used by partners on the ground. So it should not be just a research project.
Two very good questions. One is regarding the grant contribution. So if you have any other subsidy or any other funding sources that you would like to bring in addition to what Circular Buildings Coalition is supporting you, of course, you're more than welcome to do that. We don't have any limitations. And another question regarding technical support from the CBC. So what we are offering, but of course, Ivan, please feel free to add to what I'm replying now. We have a technical coaching throughout your project. So this is something that you will get in addition to the funding.
Yeah, and we have also allocated a minimum, a certain amount of working days that the partners will contribute to this. So you could get some support, for example, from us on mapping material flows, but it really depends on the amount of working days. I think we have specified the amount of working days in the call, but let's verify that and put it back into writing. A clarification also on this one. In the application form, you will be asked to describe what kind of technical support you may be requesting from CBC partners, and that will be part of the application. If you're then selected, we will sort of connect you to one of the partners of the CBC that will be your main focal point towards the CBC during the whole process.
And another question regarding, again, geography. So we can say that as long as your initiative, your solution, your project is tackling any of the barriers mentioned and any of the challenges we have identified in the European countries, this is accepted, no matter where you are from, and as long as you have establishment in the EU or the UK, that's fine. Please consider that your solution, your project, needs to tackle the European plus UK, Switzerland, and Norway challenges. There's no requirement on the working time.
No, so there's no restriction on the working time. We should commit to the project until the end. We judge on the quality of the deliverable, not on the working days. Sammy, did you answer the question on does the grant contribute to de minimis EU aid limitations?
Yes, I answered that question. So yes, as long as you have any other subsidy to bring in, we don't have any restrictions. Feel free to bring other fundings or subsidies or grants you have.
I see your question. How's the grant drawn down stages according to deliverables? I think Eva, maybe you can answer this one. How is the grant drawn down stages according to deliverables?
Yes, that's a good question. So the financing that you will be receiving is conditional. It's conditional on some of the deliverables that we are asking as outputs that I talked about earlier. Let me just access the right information. Yeah, so in the case of the first phase, 60% of the grant will be dispersed immediately upfront, and then the additional 40% will be dispersed upon the completion of the white paper at the date that we set for this. In the second phase, you will get 75% of the grant upfront, and the additional 25% will be dispersed after there's 3 progress reports that will ask you to submit throughout that period of the second phase, which will be basically making sure that your diffusion plan is going as planned, based on the steps that you identified in the first phase, in the white paper that you will produce. I hope that answers your question. And once again, you can also find this and any other sort of practicalities, legal information on our website in the application guide.
And we always have the email. So any questions after the session, you feel free to send your questions to info@circularbuildings.com.
Okay, I think if there's no more questions, Sammy, should we close this one?
Yes, maybe we can wait for a little bit, 1 more minute. If you have any more questions, please feel free to add. Otherwise, we can go ahead and close the session. Maybe a good questions on the IP. So who owns any IP generated through the work?
Is that okay? So the IP stays within. I mean, Eva, I think Eva, you can better answer this. But as far as I understood, the IP just stays with the organization developing the initiative.
Indeed, although basically whatever is put in the white paper as well as in the final learning paper that will be also publishing as part of finalizing phase 2, all of the information will be open source. So I think this is a very important nuance, that anything that is there is sort of free to be used by others. And we also, as part of the legal agreements, will have this, we'll have specified this a bit further. So maybe this is also something that we can put up there in writing in the coming period.
Will certain coalition partners be focused on only certain issues, finance, markets, ownership, and if so, which partners will be focused on which topics? We have a sort of broad vision that World GBC is mostly focused on markets, metabolic also on markets. Finance is mostly covered by Circle Economy and WBCSD, and ownership is mostly covered by Arab/Art Foundation. But if there are specific support requests, we will pull these and see and match these to the right organization during the Blueprint project process.
Great. So I think if there's no more questions, we can already proceed to closing the session of today. Thank you so much, dear participants, for joining our session. Thank you for your interest in applying for your initiatives with us. We really appreciate the industry needs change makers like you, and please, even if you feel there are some questions, or if you feel that your project is not even in where you you are expecting to be, but still do not hesitate to apply. We can always consider and see your initiative, and we would welcome any questions through the email that was provided to you. So feel free to contact us. We will get back to you as soon as possible. I would like to, on behalf of Metabolic, Circular Economy, World Business Council for Sustainable Development, World Green Building Council, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Arup, we would like to thank you for your interest. We would like to also thank Loudest Foundation for their generous support throughout the initiative, and a great support that they are bringing to the industry. Thank you all, and have a lovely day, and we will be in touch. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.